Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 611. Today we're going to take a look at the new edition of London. Now this is from Osprey Games. Now this is not just a reprint, it's really a redo of the original game, which is about 6-7 years old at this time. If you're familiar with the original game, this review is really going to be for you. I'm not going to get way into the details of how to play everything because it basically works the same. There are some definite significant differences, and if you're a longtime player, they will significantly impact your strategy and kind of the approach that you take to the game. But really the core mechanics are basically the same. I'll post a link to my old review, which I just posted recently. It took me a while to review it. And then I'll also post a link to the Watch It Played from Rodney Smith. Now he just did a complete rules walkthrough. I'd probably recommend that. Watching that over my old review, maybe it would give you a sense because the mechanics that he explains are exactly the mechanics that you're going to get in this. But I will go through and walk through the differences and kind of talk to the considerations that are going to come into play as opposed to the original. And then I'll come back here and I'll give you my thoughts on it. Okay, here's everything that you will get in the box of London, except of course for the rulebook, which I just want to make a quick mention of. Obviously, I've played London quite a bit, the original, but I want to say that the way that they redid the rules here and just the sort of the verbiage and the way they sort of splashed examples throughout and all that kind of stuff, it's a very, very quick read, and I was up and running in no time. And I would say this is really a nice way to do a Wallace rulebook. Wallace's rules are awesome usually. Sometimes the rule books are not quite as awesome as his gameplay mechanics actually are. I really don't like to bag on people on the rules, but this really is an astounding kind of leap forward in my opinion, because it was just easy, because London's a very, very simple game. The original rules, at least at the time, were a little bit hard to get into. I mean, I don't want to overstress this because I was able to get up and play just fine from the original rules. I think we probably misplayed something our first game or something probably, but this one definitely is very clear and concise. And if you're brand new to London, I think this rule book here, or of course the Watch It Played video, it will help you get through it. So I just want to make a kind of a quick kind of kudos there to kind of a second pass on the rules, and the game has been streamlined somewhat anyway, so maybe that has something to do with it. So the first thing you can notice if you're familiar with London is there is no board, there's no map. And we're going to start with these three cards here, and these are always the three first sort of boroughs that are dealt out here to start the game, and then as players purchase them, then you'll reveal new ones here off the top of the deck. So this is kind of where your board has gone. And the other thing that's different is that instead of just getting cards and having it reduce your poverty and so on, they've actually moved in some effects here. Let's take a closer look. So when you purchase this borough, this property, you get some instant effects. So you would get 2 cards that you draw, 4 victory points, you'd remove 2 poverty. Very easy to digest iconography, and you'll also have a special ability. Now if you look at the special ability and you've played the original, you'll notice this is just like one of the normal cards that you could play in your tableau, but this is now located on this location here. But let's say I went ahead and purchased this next one here on a future turn. Now you're just going to leave it like so, where you leave the relative location to the river, this little icon there, so you can see that's north of the river and it's adjacent to the river with the blue background and kind of a little shoreline there. You can leave that available, but then you're going to cover up the rest of the cards. So now this new ability that I have once per turn, exchange a card in your hand, so on, that's going to be the active ability that you have. So you can only ever have kind of one of these special active abilities there. But you can see it still maintains kind of a little bit of a location area kind of vibe there. You have, again, north and south, and then you can see these are adjacent to the river, whereas this one here, which may come out later, is north, but it's not adjacent to the river because it doesn't have a little blue background there. Now the other thing that you're going to notice here, for example, this one also, you get 4 cards, you get a victory point, and you get 2 poverty reduced immediately, is that when you run your city, and I'll explain that in a little bit, the boroughs themselves do not automatically reduce the amount of poverty that you generate from running the city. That's done away with, and that's actually very, very huge. The other thing to notice here, as I didn't mention on the other card, is you have these little icons here in the lower right. These are going to trigger when you run the city. So if we just had this one here and we ran our city, this one would give us a pound or $1 every turn. This one would actually give us and generate more poverty. So you want to keep that in mind as well. But that's how kind of what they've done with the main board of the game. Now the other change here is we have a victory point track instead of victory point chips. And frankly, I haven't quite really sussed out how I feel about open scoring versus hidden scoring. I think I like open scoring better just because you get a little bit more sense of what's going on, during the course of the game, how good or bad you're doing. Usually hidden versus open scoring for me is kind of flip a coin, and it'll kind of inform the gameplay, but it's not really worth it to me to really think too hard about usually. And then it has here the poverty track. So again, we have these wooden tokens here for 5 poverty, and this little cube's there for 1 poverty. We also have these 15 poverty markers. And poverty is scored, I believe, the exact same scoring here, but you take whoever has the least poverty, they discard that amount. So let's say I had 2 poverty, everybody else had more than me. Everybody else would discard the same amount that I had, so everybody else would discard 2 poverty. And then whatever they were currently at the end of the game based on this track is going to be the amount of points they lose. So if I ended up with 6 poverty, maybe I started with 8, Billy had 2, so everybody discard down to 2, I discard down to 2, go down to 6, I lose 7 points at the end of the game. Now the other way that you can lose points is by taking loans here. And loans do also something else very different, which they did not do in the original. Whenever you need to pay something, or you have to pay some kind of fine or whatever, some penalty, or you need to buy something, you don't have the money, then you immediately take a loan, and you will get $10 cash immediately in your hand, and then of course you got to pay for whatever. And then at the start of your turn, you can pay $15 to pay off the loan plus interest. Or at the end of the game, you can kind of wait and save up, and then you can pay off all the loans. But it really behooves you in this version to pay off the loans during the game, because when you run your city, each $10 worth of loans that you have is going to generate a poverty for you. So that is super annoying. So loans pretty much work the same way, except for now they're going to generate poverty, and nobody wants that. So the main course of the game is this giant deck of cards. And it's relatively unchanged from how it worked in the original. Obviously, some of the abilities on cards have been moved to the different boroughs here. They've reworded these somewhat, and I think, well, I know for sure the underground cards, which are towards the bottom of the deck, are definitely different because obviously we don't have a map anymore. But I didn't go through the old version and onesie twosie it, but it feels like a couple of them are just slightly changed, and maybe it's just the wording. Like for example, the action cards, they tell you to remove them from the game, which to me is a lot more clear than expend versus discard and that whole nonsense. Which is one of the things I remember getting wrong when I first played it. So let's take a look at some of these cards, and I'll kind of just quickly talk about how you play these, but this is obviously, the core piece of the game. Okay, so I've broken out the deck here into 3 sections. So you may not be able to see that, but up in the upper top part of the card in the center, you've got A and then B and C. So you've got an A deck, a B deck, and a C deck. You take and shuffle these individually, and then the A deck goes on top of the B, which goes on top of the C. And then you're dealt 6 cards out of this deck, and you have a hand limit of 9 cards. At the start of your turn, you have to draw a card either off the top of the deck or off of this display board. And this is kind of like the discard board. So as people expend and play cards, except for action cards, which tell you to remove them from the game, then you're going to put these on the board here. Now you can see the different colors here. So in a 2-player game, you're just going to use this colors here. In a 3-player, you add a column, and then on 4-player, you add the other column there. So you have a certain amount of these, and then as you sort of go to discard and discard cards, these are going to fill up. You always discard to the top row first, and then if the top row is full, then you discard to the bottom row. If you go to discard again and then the whole section is full, then you will discard the bottom row, move anything in the top row down here, and then to keep discarding again, and then you always discard the bottom row as you go. So, and that's kind of interesting because like people are also going to be picking and choosing cards, like I said, either out of here or off the top of the deck. So what's available may go away very quickly, or it may hang around for a while. And so just like the original game, you have 1 of 4 possible actions, and again, you must always draw at least 1 card either off the deck or off the display. And you can either, like I said earlier, buy one of these boroughs, you put these in front of you, you do the effects, now you have a new effect. You can just, for your action, draw 3 cards, and again, you can draw off the deck and or out of the display. And then you can play cards into your display and then run your city. So that's typically what you're going to be doing most of, is playing cards, running your cities, and then here and there buying these boroughs. Sometimes you draw 3 cards. So when you want to play a card, just like the original game, let's say you want to play this hospital, you have to discard a card of the matching color here. So in this case, I would discard a blue card to the display. This card will now be available for others to grab. And then you'll be able to put this in display here. So we'll just start a little stack like so. And maybe further on down the line, we wanted to play this underground. And you also have to discard a pink card, which could be another underground. Now, in addition, these cards have costs up in the upper left. Like this stock exchange here, this kind of white yellowish card does not have a cost. So in this case, we would just have to discard a matching color. In this case, we'd have to pay £2 and then £7. And then some cards, like this card here, this is an action card, and you can see that because it just says action there. And this one you just play and you remove from the game and you do what it says. But it can be used to also pay for, obviously, like other blue cards like that. So as you play the cards, you'll have stacks here, and then maybe on later turns you might play cards on top of pre-existing cards. So as you start to build out more and more stacks, and it's worth mentioning that you can't play cards on the same turn on the same stack. So I couldn't like play this card, play this one on top of that, this one on top of that. You have to wait till your next turn to cover up previously played cards. But then we're going to get to the point where we want to run our city, and we're going to basically activate all the actions of all the cards that are in front of us here. So I'll just put these out here just kind of as a weird example. And when you do that, you're going to do all of the effects here, kind of working left to right on the card, but you can kind of activate them in any order. So let's just first take a look at this underground. So here you can kind of read them left to right. So this says discard any card. And one thing of note is, for players familiar with the game, there's no color restrictions on any of these discards. It's all just any card. And I haven't counted, but I feel like there's more poppers, which I haven't mentioned. These are just kind of like dead cards. You can see they're gray cards, but different little activities and abilities like this and other things will allow you to kind of make use of them. But normally they're just kind of worthless and you don't want them in your hand. So in this case, you could discard any card, including a popper, and it'll say gain 3 prestige, that's your victory points, plus 1 additional prestige for each borough you own. If you own both north and south of London, you have to pay an extra $2. So remember, you have the boroughs here and they have the north and south icon on there. But you want to get a lot of them because, hey, you're going to give you an extra prestige point, but you got to pay a little bit if you have them across the river. So you pay this cost. You can see this one has no cost here, as well as this one. You do whatever's in the middle. This one here will just give you £4 or $4. And then if it has this symbol, then you have to flip it over like that. You can see this one you don't normally have to flip over, but this card has a very cool ability here. You can see it just kind of sits there like, well, what does it do? Well, right here it says when you would flip another card in your display, you may flip this instead. So this can just sit here, and it's worth noting that you don't have to you're not committed to activate these. If I didn't want to activate that, I don't have to. So instead I can say, okay, I'm going to activate this, but say instead of flipping this, because I want to do it again to get more victory points, I'm going to flip this hospital instead. And so I'm not going to go through all the different cards and different types. There's just a lot of different things. There's stuff that allow you to take money from other players. You can kind of have different effects, like as you build cards, you'll stack money on here, and then when you run it and flip it, you'll get all the money off the card and so on. So there's all kinds of cool different effects and kinds of little combos and things. Let's say we had to play this on a later turn. We're going to run this. It has no cost. We're actually going to reduce our poverty by 2 and then flip it over. And also you'll notice some of these cards have victory points. As you kind of build up the different stacks here, you're going to kind of bury victory points in these. And then at the end of the game, you're going to dig through all the stacks and count up all the victory points on the cards that do have them. But now here is the tricky part. After you run your city, you're going to count up all your stacks. You're going to collect a poverty token, in this case 4, for each of those. Any cards in your hand, let's say we had 2 cards in our hand, we're going to get 2 more poverty. Yippee. And then again for each loan, pretend we had 1 loan here, then we're going to get another poverty here. And remember, unlike the original game, these boroughs are not going to reduce the amount of poverty that you generated. So the interesting kind of thing about that is there's no like net zero poverty possible. Even though we ran this one and we reduced our poverty by 2, let's say we had no poverty. Well, that's pointless, right? Because there's no poverty removed. You don't get this poverty until after you run the whole city. And that's a big part of the game. And that's frankly a huge part of the game, that the boroughs no longer reduce the poverty generated and the loans now add even further to that. Okay, so that's the new edition of London. I love this new edition. So London was one of my top 20 games of all time when I did my top 100 list about 2 years ago now. It was, I think, my number 15 or 16 or something like that. And this would definitely push it up the list for sure. I don't know exactly where it would fall, but I think this is definitely an improvement on the original game. And there's a couple of reasons why. And really, I mentioned there kind of at the end of the sort of slight rules overview that I did, is how poverty gets generated when you run your city. It's such a small tweak, a couple of small tweaks, but it really informs how that end game kind of plays out, especially in the two-player game. So in a two-player game in the original, you had the board and you could just kind of spread out. Now there was a two-player variant where it would like take away a city location and stuff like that for you, but that wasn't in the original rules. And it also had the rule that you couldn't build duplicate of the same cards, which is not in here. But so it was very easy to get to a point where you had no poverty net when you ran your city, because let's say you had a stack of 4 and you ended up with like a card or 2 in your hand. If you had 5, 6 boroughs, which in a two-player game was easy, in a 3 and 4 player game, not that easy, but you still were reducing your net poverty either way, no matter the player count. So at that point, you could kind of just run your city, happy day, and it was super easy. Once you kind of built up the engine, then you were getting to the point where you're more focused on generating money, and some of the cards that generate victory points were kind of what you started to go after once you kind of got your engine and you kind of raced out and bought the city. And that was cool because it was kind of a race and you kind of push your luck with the loans a little bit as you move out in the city. So, but this now makes that much more egregious and much more like an anchor on your thought process as you go through the game. And to me, it actually adds a lot of player interaction, because the original London, not for nothing, it's a multiplayer solitaire game for the most part. The board did add some interaction, because like I said, it's kind of a race, and there was some kind of key locations across bridges and stuff, and having adjacency and getting the undergrounds all kind of spread out, and thinking about that early game versus long game. But that game doesn't exist anymore. But so this one, it's a little bit more interactive in terms of, okay, now I can see the victory points. I can see kind of where everybody's poverty is at. I can see how much they're going to generate. So I know how many points, relatively somebody's going to lose at the game. If somebody's very low in poverty, okay, I know I can take a hit of like 5, 7 points. How many victory point cards have I been stashing away? Have I been paying attention to what everybody else stashes away? Those victory point symbols are kind of small, so I don't really see people reading them across the table. But if you were really into it and wanted to be very competitive, then you can certainly, always ask what everybody's playing. But this is definitely more interactive in that sense, because also the boroughs that you're going after, in the original game, they were important, but it was sort of like a long stretch importance. If somebody grabbed something from you, yeah, maybe you wanted it, but then there was other options, so you could just go other places. This one, there's a lot of abilities face up on the cards, and some of them are very cool, because like sometimes you can get one that says like, hey, you don't have to draw cards if you don't want to on your turn, because remember, you're always drawing a card. No matter what, you have to draw a card. Well, there's one where you can draw 0, 1, or 2 cards to start your turn. So like, hey, I need cards, so I get 2 to start my turn. Now I'm in good shape. Hey, I don't want any cards because I'm going to run my city. I don't want to have that extra poverty hanging around. So I'm going to draw 0 and then run my city, and I don't get any poverty for the cards in my hand. So you want to go, oh, that's good. I want to get that. I want to get that. This one's going to give me a lot of cards and some points. This one's going to give me, just eat away a bunch of my poverty right then. So there's a certain kind of timing with that. That's really cool. So all of that, man, it's the same game, but it just really kind of creates itself so differently over the course of the game. I was trying to come up with like a big fancy word, but anyway, so yeah, it just plays so differently, and to me it's a little bit more strategic. It's a little bit more interactive. I think after a play or two, that's when you start to see, okay, I've got to watch out for this and that. This is the really good location right now, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a definite improvement. It kind of takes away from some of the scripted nature as well with the original game, because the original game, you're like, okay, I want to get this spot and then this spot on the board. I got to do that. After a while, you would play like, okay, I'm going to do this, build the cards, buy the borough, run the city, and that first few turns would start to get scripted after a while. Whereas this, because the locations kind of come out dynamically, except for those first 3, that's going to change up at least the early game quite a bit compared to the other. Oh, and the last thing I guess I should talk about is, of course, the loans actually generating more poverty. So that's a huge pain, because yeah, you know, 1 or 2 poverty doesn't make a difference, but it's like every time I run my city now and that loan's sitting there, that's 1 poverty, another poverty, another poverty. So it's gonna just kind of build up, and after a while, you run your city maybe 4 times since you took the loan, you've generated 4 more poverty, and it's harder to get rid of poverty now. So that makes a big difference. So it behooves you to kind of pay off the loan, you know, during the game, which makes a little bit more thematic sense. It's not like, I'm gonna sit here on my pile of cash, not worry about it, just kind of, you know, stuff money aside, and then just pay it all off at the end as much as I can, because they're worth -7 points at the end of the game as well. So you do want to pay them off. You don't just want to sit there with them. And of course, you took a loan for $10, you got to pay it off for 15. So it's just a little bit more onerous that way with how all that works. So anyway, it's a vast improvement. I like the look and feel. You got to kind of look at some of the different cards. I think, I don't know, with the graphic design, you can kind of go back and forth on that. I think there's parts of it I like. I like the art. I think on the cards, the illustration is a little bit better. But there's something about, I like the card backs on the old one. But, you know, I don't know. It's a silly thing. It would just, they're very like kind of, I don't know, kind of a bold card back with a big old London word and then the kind of the cover of the game on there. But that's whatever, you know. I think this is fine. I love the illustrations on the city cards, the borough cards, and all that kind of stuff. Maybe the iconography is a little bit tiny, but that's really, really nitpicky. Anyway, so definitely recommend London. This is going to be available. It hasn't been available for quite a long time. If you're a fan of like San Juan or Race for the Galaxy, Glory to Rome, you know, that kind of stuff, I think there's a good shot that you'll like this. It's not really like just like Glory to Rome or just like Race for the Galaxy. It's not like that, but it's in that kind of school. So there's a good bet, I think, that you'll enjoy this. And you're going to get a lot of plays out of this one for sure, because this is just kind of thrown, like I said, everything out of the water for me. I got to kind of reinvestigate, you know, the timings and the good, what's good or bad cards and all that stuff. So I'm super excited because one of my favorite games has been refreshed, and hey, I get to play a new game, but it's the same, but it's new. All right, thanks.